All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the Corning Museum of Glass. Welcome to our folks here in the amphitheater. Welcome to everybody live online. We have a special program for you here. We've got our guest artist, Céline Salomon. We are very happy to welcome her here from France, from Paris. Her studio is in Paris, France. But we're excited to be working with her. We've got a really interesting demonstration planned for you, a really fresh and new approach to working with glass. One of our favorite things to do here at the Corning Museum of Glass is invite people from all different types of backgrounds, all different places in the world. And we're excited to be showing off what we've been coming up with here at the museum this week. So Céline is from France, from Paris originally, but she's kind of bounced around, taking influence from all around the world, taking influence from her studies in China, working in the United States, in Paris. We're excited to be part of one of her first experiences working with hot glass in this capacity. We've got a fantastic team of our glassmakers here at the museum. We've got Chris Rochelle, Katie Hubbs, Jeff Mack. We've got a stellar crew here putting together these wonderful pieces from Céline. So Céline mostly is working in ceramics. She's a designer. You see lots of really beautiful images of her work, including furniture and lighting, these beautiful vessels where there's a lot of influences that work very nicely with glass. We'll mostly be blowing glass here today and taking some of her ideas and bringing them to life right here in the amphitheater. So I'd like to, let's grab a microphone for you, Céline. We'd like to introduce Céline. She'd like to say a few words, and she'll let you know a little bit more in depth on her work and her inspirations for what we're up to here today.
Thank you, Tom, for the wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today. So, as Tom was saying, I'm doing this is for me, a one-week residency here at the Corning Museum of Glass with WantedDesign. And it's actually part of a bigger residency that I'm doing. I'm spending 2 months in New York. And it's so it's a residency with Villa Albertine, which is our kind of French cultural agency here in the United States. So it's an exchange program between France and the US. As Tom said, I am a ceramicist. I have never worked with glass before. So it's been really an incredible experience to work with all the team here. I mean, they've been really, really great and really patient with me with the little knowledge that I knew. So the approach I had for this week and what I'm trying to work on in this bigger 2 months residency that is based in New York is to look at how in New York nature and human and living thing try to cohabitate and live in this very rigid and gridded and dense city that is New York. So I don't know if you guys have already been to New York, but you have these long avenues and they create this kind of, we could say canyon, but they're actually very, very straight and dense and steel and glass canyons. And so I'm interested to see how more living and human and natural things cohabitate and try to move around those very rigid canyon. So it's interesting because glass is this very fluidy kind of material, and I arrived at this idea that I wanted to see how it would react when we would press it and force it to have this very geometric and rectangular kind of form. Just for the anecdote, it's funny because with Katie we went to see, how do you call that, polariscope, to see how the glass is stressed. Is stressed. And when you actually do those rectangular forms, the glass gets very, very stressed out. So it was really interesting to see, again, how this flowy and normally very fluid material, when you compress it, it actually becomes very, very stressed. So we've been experimenting. We also been experimenting with ceramic and glass. Those are the remains of our experiments. So I brought from France those blue shards that are pieces that were broken in my studio, and also those porcelain petals. And we tried to incorporate them in the glass. And it was a very, very nice experiment. Unfortunately, the next day when we opened the kiln, well, the glass has been too stressed out, and it just didn't really like the experiment. But it was a very, very interesting way to approach glass. And yes, so we will make another vessel. We will play again around with glass and with rectangular shapes. And I will give back the mic to Tom. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was wonderful insight into what we're up to here. And we are well underway. Chris Rochelle has been gathering up some glass, collecting our glass out of our large melting furnace. These pieces are pretty substantial. They're a pretty good sized piece, so we need a good amount of material. So Chris will be heading back to the furnace here for his third collection gather of glass, plunging the head of the pipe down into that liquid glass. That furnace is 2,120 degrees Fahrenheit, or maybe about 1,150 degrees Celsius. But we do need a good amount of glass. We need some material here. We want to have a decent sized canvas to work with. So, yeah, collecting up a good amount of glass for a larger scale piece. These pieces, we've experimented with blowing them into different molds. We have some old Steuben factory molds that we've used, these kind of square blocks. I don't think they were originally used as a blow mold. They were basically used to create just a big block for carving glass. So we have these kind of big block molds. I'm not sure if Chris is going to use that for this particular piece. We've gone back and forth between a strong and rigid square or rectangle to these softer forms. There's been ones that feel more industrial, more like a solid block of glass, ones that have been softer and a little bit more, have like a little bit more of a human touch to them. I've got a question here. Sure. Okay. All right. A question from the internet. Ryan would like to know, what were some of the positive things of working with the ceramics and the glass? What were some of the negative things of working with the ceramics and glass? One of the really nice positive things was when we were working with the two materials together, the pieces looked really beautiful. They had a very different aesthetic to what we're used to as glass artists, kind of combining the texture of the clay and the ceramic material, and the texture and the smoothness of the glass. There was just this really beautiful contrast in between the two. It was very inspiring. It was very inspiring. And then all of a sudden, the extremely negative part of combining glass and ceramics came through. A lot of glass artists that I know might have done some ceramic work in the past, and we've kind of seen some of this in the Corning area. There's a lot of artists that work with clay, a lot of artists that work with glass. And then inevitably, if you are sticking them together and you let them cool down together, they have a different coefficient of expansion. The ceramic, as it cools, it shrinks. And it actually shrinks a lot in comparison to how much the glass shrinks. The glass shrinks a little bit, but nowhere near how much the ceramic will shrink. That inevitably will cause stress. Stress causes cracks, and the pieces fall apart. So the positive part of working with the ceramics and glass, it gave Celine this inspiration. It gave her this means of, I mean, even though the pieces ended up eventually kind of failing and falling apart, there was a kind of these beautiful moments that were very, very inspiring. And there's many other ways of combining glass and ceramic. We can glue them together, for instance. She's not that interested in gluing them together, but we were just right before we started the live stream, we were talking about creating impressions in the glass with the ceramic pieces, creating these other means of putting the two materials together. And there's a lot there. It's an inspiring process. Even though kind of sticking them all together all at once doesn't usually work. You know, some of the engineers here in Corning might be able to figure something like that out a little bit, but that would take some time. Time that we do not have here. But an inspiring process is smush these two materials together that don't necessarily go together, but we came up with new ideas, a new approach, and a new understanding for these two materials. All right. So we're moving right along. What we're doing now is applying some color, some colorized glass. I heard the team behind me refer to these kind of splotches of powderized glass color as clouds. So we're going to see a lot of industrial shape and form interacting with the natural world. Kind of it's quite appropriate. Some of the stuff that I've read about Celine here, she's often talking about kind of straddling in between two worlds, maybe straddling between art and design. And in this case, this seems to really nicely fit when we make this kind of rectangular form that will really nicely reflect a large scale building. And if you're thinking about reflection, when you're walking through New York City, you might see a big, beautiful glass-surfaced building, and you'll see the reflection of a cloud. You'll be kind of reminded of nature as you walk through such an unnatural space. So we've got our clouds on the surface of the glass. So we used white glass powder. The different glass colors are made by adding different metal oxides and chlorides to the raw materials of the clear glass. So you can take a whole furnace full of glass and put in some cobalt. Cobalt will turn the glass blue. Celine experimented with a little bit of cobalt earlier in the week and today. Gold might create a really beautiful ruby red color. These white colors are usually made with tin and titanium, and we end up with the ability to use those colors in many different forms. We're using a powder in this case, which makes sense. We're trying to make a fluffy, airy cloud. Sometimes we'll use frit, small chips of glass color that'll stick to the surface of a piece, but that gives you kind of a mottled effect. It really wouldn't look nice as a cloud. We can use a solid chunk of that glass color to create really like a nice thin veneer of color throughout the entire body of a piece. But in this case, the powder seems to suit the design really well. Chris is going back in for another gather of glass. He strips away a little bit of material. So this is basically encasing those white clouds. You get this really nice, it's basically a protective layer. It's basically protecting the colorized layer of glass. We've got a bigger block for shaping and centering the glass. This is a large wooden scoop tool. These are made out of cherry wood. Looks like somebody took a bite out of this one, though. Missing a little spot. Close up. Sometimes we've got all different size blocks, different shapes, different sizes. They come from we use a couple different manufacturers. Somebody must have dropped that one and took a chunk out of it. Now Chris is going to work with the paper. He's got a big paper, a bunch of sheets of newspaper all folded up and soaked in water. The block tool is wood soaked in water. The paper tool is paper soaked in water. Right when the water touches the 2,000-degree glass, it turns into steam, and the glass rides along on a thin layer of steam for about 10 or 15 seconds before we have to dip the tool back in the water. And right back over to that reheating furnace. So build up a little bit of heat. We'll go through some fairly traditional glass blowing processes here. If you've watched our live stream videos online several times, or if you've been here to the museum before, some of these first few steps in the process are pretty standard as far as blowing and inflating the glass, shaping that material. We've got a good amount of glass. You know, it might be 10 pounds of glass or something like that at this point. But that's a little difficult to turn back and forth by yourself, so Jeff will jump in. We usually work together like this, together in teams. Teams of 2 or 3 are fairly common. But if you have something really big or really complicated, you might have even more people involved. So Jeff will turn the pipe. Katie will help inflate the glass. So you'll see us using our reheating furnace quite often, kind of back and forth. Sometimes in our live stream, we'll have one of our gigantic reheating furnace on. This one is, these pieces aren't that big. They're not so big that we need the really big furnace, but a good amount of glass. We'll cut in a constriction line right off the end of the pipe. That constriction line will be the thinnest and the weakest point on the glass. That'll enable us to break the piece free from the pipe right there. So Chris has been our lead gaffer for this piece, or for this week, really. Chris has been working hard, making a lot of work every day. Celine's been rather ambitious with her residency, which is just what we like here. She dove in on the first day and started experimenting, playing, making mistakes, learning, and then applying her knowledge into the next design. She's been sketching and drawing feverishly, just kind of constantly coming up with new ideas. If you've ever taken a glass blowing class or been involved in the glass making process before, those first few experiences can really be inspiring to see what the glass can do. We are happy that Celine showed up with ideas that were possible to be made in glass. Sometimes we get guest artists and designers that show up and we look at their drawings, we look at their ideas, and we say, I don't think that's possible to make that out of glass. Sometimes we'll try and fail, but we look through. She came with 50 ideas or something like that. It's like, I'm looking at all these sketches. There's a whole lot of sketches, a whole lot of designs. So you can kind of narrow it down. It's best to come with lots of ideas and figure out what your team can achieve. So we're happy with how Celine really approached this residency. So if you're watching online or here in person, definitely check out Celine's work. She has an Instagram. Her Instagram handle is @Celine__Salomon. So CELINE__SALOMON. So check her out online if you want to see some of the work, some of her ideas. Some really, really beautiful ceramic work. There's this beautiful sink that I really liked. I want the sink in my house. Celine's exhibited her work all around the world. Basel and Switzerland and Paris, New York. All the places that you would expect to see some really beautiful design work. So here we'll be able to see her influences from her own study and work as an architect. Worked as an architect, I believe, for about 4 years. And then Céline decided to try and work on a more human scale. Scale things down, make things personal that you might be able to pick up or stand next to and feel. Try to work on a more human scale. So she ended up going and studying ceramics in China. One of the cities that's well known for porcelain. So you can see a lot of her artistic work in ceramics. Some really interesting, really beautiful designs. But we're excited to be making some of these nice pieces in glass. All right, so we've got this nice big cylinder in glass. I think they're going to refine it a little bit. Then things will go, I believe we'll start getting kind of out of the round. We'll squish and squeeze this bubble of glass flat. Sort of get some edges and corners. You can see those clouds. So we've got a nice big cylinder. What we're going to work on now is kind of the tip of the bubble, the front end of this bubble of glass. We will heat that up, flatten things out. This piece will stand up as a vessel, stand up as a vase. We have some pieces in the amphitheater here. All right. So we'll work on the bottom section of the piece here, make a flat spot for the piece to rest on. Katie's warming up a big kiln shelf, a big ceramic kiln shelf. So I believe this piece will get flattened on the big kiln shelf. So the whole team's involved here. Jeff's turning, Katie's flattening the bottom section, Chris is shaping the sides, making sure we have this nice crisp and clean flat bottom on our piece. So here we'll kind of build up some heat in the glass, making sure that really most of the bubble is nice and hot, nice and even in temperature. Kind of torch the back end of the bubble. The back end of the bubble is the last thing into the furnace. It's the first thing out. So every time that we reheat the glass, that area of the piece doesn't get as much heat as the rest. So if we want to focus a little bit more heat in one area or another, we'll use this torch. We'll kind of balance out the heats. So when we go to flatten this whole piece, the whole thing nicely flattens. building up a little heat on that back end of the piece. We'll get that really nice and hot. And I believe we're about ready to squish and squeeze the glass. Chris will put on some gloves. Normally we don't really put gloves on, but this part of the process, he'll be pretty close. He'll be squeezing the glass with a wood paddle and the hot kiln shelf. And most of the time, the wood paddle will catch on fire. You've got to hold onto it with your hands. So we put on some leather gloves so we can get nice and close to the glass. So Jeff builds up a little bit of heat. Katie's got an air gun, an air hose, so she'll be blowing the smoke away from Chris. Give it a good squish and squeeze. Chris calls the shots. He calls for a flip. Jeff flips the piece over, pretty aggressively squishing and squeezing that glass nice and flat. 2 paddles now to squeeze the sides of the piece. He'll readdress that bottom section that needs to stay flat. The hot kiln shelf doesn't absorb very much heat out of the glass, so we end up with a little bit more time to sculpt and shape this big bubble. You know, if we just had this on the marver on that big steel table, press that glass down onto that steel, it would probably crack the side of the glass. The steel absorbs a lot of heat out of the glass. Different materials will absorb heat from the glass at different rates. The steel absorbs a whole lot of heat. So we would end up with a much shorter amount of time to work on the piece. And you could end up cracking the glass. Jeff is capping the pipe with his backhand, making sure that no air is escaping, because you can't squish the bubble all the way flat and have the 2 sides of the bubble contact each other and end up with a whole mess there. But actually, that might be part of the design in this piece in a moment. So squish and squeeze that bubble. We've got this really nice, soft, rectangular shape. So now Chris is using the hot torch. That's burning a mixture of oxygen and natural gas. Looks like he wants those edges to be a little hotter. If those edges or corners get a little bit hotter, we might be able to get a little more definition. Might be able to get those edges a little more crisp and clean. All right, so in for a reheat. Now, if we had those edges a little hotter on their way into the reheating furnace, those will be a little hotter on the way out of the reheating furnace. Just kind of preheating those areas that we want to shape the most. Back onto that marvering table. Chris keeps the paddles moving as to not pick up any marks on the sides of the piece. All right. All right, so we're just Chris and Céline are chatting through a few of the finer details here. So when we squish and squeeze the glass like that, we lose a little bit of definition on what will be the bottom portion of the piece. So I believe they'll build up some heat on the tip of the bubble again and re-flatten the bottom in a similar way to how we squished and squeezed the glass flat. So Jeff will get that area nice and hot, and I believe he's going to pick the piece up kind of vertically. Yep, and press that down onto the kiln shelf as Chris kind of refines the shape on the base of the piece. Chris is calling some shots as far as how much pressure to push down onto the bottom portion of the piece here. And another touch, making this nice and flat the other way. So it's kind of a delicate balance if you've ever blown glass and made a square piece by hand. You kind of have to go back and forth a lot. You kind of press on one side and the other side kind of bulges out. So you kind of have to go back and forth, shaping a form like this a lot. So if anybody has any questions here in the amphitheater, please let us know. We'd love to answer any questions that you might have. If you're online watching us and you've got some questions, our digital team will be able to convey those questions to us live right here on the stage. So let me know if you've got any questions. We'd love to answer them for you. About Céline, about the glass, about some of these techniques that we've been working with here today and this week. I'd love to answer the questions for you. Send them in. We'll convey them right on over to us. Okay, so now we have that piece, kind of that vertical, I guess maybe not vertical, on the smaller, skinnier sides. Refine that shape really nicely. Now we'll go through a lot of shaping here. We're getting close. Now, earlier I mentioned we've tried a lot of these rectangular forms in many different ways. We did use molds. So we blew the glass into some molds. We had these square molds. A few of them are made out of graphite. I mean, you can get a really strong, rigid, square piece out of a square graphite mold. But that's not what we're after. We're after kind of a balance between the man-made and the handmade. We're kind of after this concept of making something square and rigid, but still being able to see and feel that it was made by hand. So we do have some molds right here on the front of the amphitheater. And we've tried that. We've worked through some of her ideas with those molds. And now we've moved on to hand shaping these pieces just to get that subtle softness, bring it more into that kind of human realm, that a little bit more of a flow, a little bit more natural. Ooh, all right, we've got a question from online. Yeah, did we know, when we were experimenting with the glass and ceramics, did we know before that the ceramics and the glass would not play well together, would not stay together? Did we know that beforehand, given that the two materials have such a different coefficient of expansion? We did. Most of us did know that. You know, a couple of us have degrees in ceramics and degrees in glass, and we've seen that play before, of people trying to get those two materials to work together. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't take that risk and see what happens and learn from it. You know, in an artist residency like this, the purpose is not always a final product. The purpose can be just that learning, just feeling the material. You know, Céline had to really figure out her voice in glass and her impact on the material, how it's going to work with what she knows, which is ceramics. So even though a couple of those pieces ended up in shards, I think the knowledge, I think the experimentation ended up being really valuable to influence what we have come to today. Working today, working tomorrow, seeing that interaction between the ceramics and glass and how they fracture and move. So now we've kind of taken some of the shards from some of those early experiments. We've started attaching some of the shards onto the surface of other pieces.
How deep do you want to go with that? Deep?
All right, so now we had this beautifully refined square form. Some communication going on here. Chris is heating up one little section of the piece, an area that Céline has selected. And then Céline will create some marks, create texture, create this flow in this rigid form. She'll poke into the surface of the glass, I believe with a graphite tool in this case. Oh, nope, that one's maybe like a brass or bronze tool. Oh, she's switching back to graphite, sorry. So now we'll put some pretty serious evidence of the hand back into this piece. All right, so we did have a question come in that was, will Céline be working with ceramics and glass together, again, during this residency or today? And we've had the first experiments where we were trying to combine the ceramics and glass together. Those were kind of our failures. But Céline has also made some beautiful tools out of ceramic. We have them laying out here on the front of the table. We'll get a shot of those in a minute when we're not doing something so intense with the glass. Look at that, poking into the surface of the glass. Digging and prodding, moving that material, changing the way that that glass is going to reflect and refract light. So now, some of the influence that the ceramics will have on the glass will be in these tools. She's created texturizing tools, different tools that might look like a big knife or a really kind of textured tile that we can press into the surface of the glass. So we'll probably end up doing some of that using some of her handmade ceramic tools to manipulate the glass. But we'll just use them just to manipulate the glass. We don't want them to stick together and create that compatibility issue again. Okay, so we've got kind of a cool moment going on here. We will use a tool called a tagliole. And here's Céline is kind of dictating right where to heat, exactly where she wants that material to heat up. Chris heats it a little bit and pokes it with the tweezers. That gives him a physical mark to see where he can really heat the glass. Okay, so we're getting 2 marks on either side of our piece. So when we get these 2 marks on either side, now Chris really knows what to heat up. He's going to heat up both sides of the piece, and then together, Céline will press the tagliole into one side of the piece, and I think Chris will press another tag into the other side of the piece, and they'll make a connection inside of this bubble of glass. When we make this connection inside the bubble of glass, Chris can actually then create an opening or a tunnel or tube that runs through the piece. Okay, so we're gonna get one. I can hear the call. We're gonna do one more flash heat, one more short reheat, and when Jeff gets back to the workbench with the piece, they'll use 2 tags and basically jam them through the body of the piece to create a small connection. So they'll basically just kind of try to meet in the middle. Get 2 sides. There we go. So Céline will be kind of pushing down. Chris will be pushing up. And get those to touch right in the middle. You get this really cool contact point in the midsection of the piece. They use the handle of the taglioles to do that because those handles are a little fatter, a little wider. So we have this kind of larger tunnel. Now Chris can work on heating up that area in between, and I think he's already done it. I think he's already dug a hole through the middle of this vessel. Okay. So they're talking through the next couple steps. That kind of tunnel running through the piece, it's clean and crisp. It's got this really nice, smooth surface to it right now, but Céline doesn't want that. She wants to manipulate that. It looks maybe too smooth and clean. So we take a tool, press into that surface. All right. It's great to see Céline with the tools in her hand, manipulating that piece exactly how she wants it, which is cool. A true collaboration between our glassmakers here at the museum and our guest artist, Céline Salomon. All right, so we are about done with the bottom half of the piece, maybe the bottom 2/3 of the piece in this case. And we're going to flip the piece around. We'll go through our punty process. Jeff has gathered up a little bit of glass on the end of a solid punty rod. We'll shape it up to be a little bit of a point, then present it on over to Chris and Katie. We'll apply this onto the bottom of the piece, somewhere around 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. That should stick and fuse, but we don't want it to weld on there permanently. It needs to be able to hold on to the bottom of the piece for the rest of the process. But at the end of the process, we'll break our punty free without damaging the bottom of the piece. So now we build a little bit more heat on what is the top portion of the piece with the torch, making sure things are fairly even. Once all the temperatures are just right, we'll apply that punty onto the bottom portion of the piece here. Now we'll break the piece free from the blowpipe right at that constriction line, right off the end of the pipe. That constriction line will be the thinnest and the weakest kind of the weakest portion of the piece here. We'll intentionally create some stress in that area. So here's our punty. And now we kind of travel both pipes back and forth together, making sure everything's running on one nice straight line, nice and on center. And then to break the piece free from the pipe, we'll stress that constriction line. And you can either use a cold steel tool to do that, or a little bit of water. What we're trying to do is create small stress cracks just along that constriction line. And then a good sharp tap to the pipe will send a vibration down, and the glass will break wherever it's the weakest, right along that line. Very nicely done. Let's give him a nice round of applause for that. It's a difficult part of the process. So we flip our piece around, but now the lip of the piece is broken glass. It's sharp and has some imperfections. We'll get that really nice and hot and melt the front edge of the piece nice and smooth. It takes some time. This is one of the longer heats in the process. Look at that. That's a beautiful shot up on the screens there. Got Brad Patoka on the camera today. Brad or Alexis are usually running the cameras, editing the videos that you see. Lots of videos coming out. through the Corning Museum of Glass's YouTube channel. So if you're watching this live now, this will pop up on the museum's YouTube channel in a little while. We give them a little bit of time, a week or two or something like that. They'll post it up on the YouTube channel. Follow along with us on all of our different social medias, the Facebook and the Instagram, and the TikTok. Fresh and new TikTok for the Corning Museum of Glass. About to bust out my dance moves. Hot Shop dance moves. All right. So we take our time. The glass up on the top portion of the piece is always a little thicker, a little heavier. So in order for the glass to break free from the blowpipe, probably had the glass down around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit to break off. But we want to bring that temperature back up to about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. So we could do this. We'll stretch that material out. This elongates the whole form if you need to make your piece taller. This makes some sense. But in this case, I believe we will just kind of remove some excess glass. So trim away that material from the top portion of the piece. This will just kind of ensure that we have a nice, elegant and thin lip on the top portion of the piece here. So there's no one right way of doing all of these different techniques, especially on such an experimental piece like this. But Chris has some shears. He'll cut through the glass. It's fairly easy to cut through the glass as long as it's nice and hot like that. Feels a little bit like cutting through an orange peel or a sponge with a pair of scissors. Has kind of a funny, soft feeling to it. When we trim away that excess glass, now we can start thinking about the shape, about the form.
Am I beating down to the square? We're not going to really like pump anything up, so yeah, just where you think it's fine. I'm going to start to stretch it open.
Chris and Jeff are kind of chatting through final form. Céline and Chris were talking about the final form earlier. So Chris kind of being the lead gaffer, calling some of the shots, how deep to reheat the piece inside of the furnace. So he can get done the next few steps in that process. Now this is pretty interesting. I mean, you've got that big tunnel in the middle of your piece. So this is certainly not the same as opening up a nice vase or a bowl, something that our team would be very, very used to, very comfortable with. But there's a tunnel in the way. You can't let the blades of the jacks go too deep inside the piece. You'll hit that tunnel. So be careful. This is a little different, a little more challenging. That's the fun part for us here. This has been quite the exciting week, having Céline here, coming up with new things, new ideas, new challenges for our glassmakers. One of our favorite things of working here at the museum is how we get to work with all of these different guest artists. Chris has switched over to the parchofis. He's got some wood blade parchofis. The wooden tools are soft on the surface of the glass, so they don't leave any scratches or marks. We're able to pull open that front edge of the piece. So I'm just kind of listening into their conversation here. Seems like the top portion of this piece will remain more of a cylindrical form. So a few of these pieces, a few versions of this piece, we really go through and make the top into a nice rectangle to kind of mimic the shape of the bottom of the piece. But the top portion of this piece is going to have a little more of a cylindrical form. Céline looks on very carefully, kind of calling some of the shots as far as shape and form and design. All right, we've got, I believe, some final approval from Céline on this piece. She says she's very happy with this. As far as, I believe, as far as the general form. But now I think we're going to go back in and add a little bit more of that manipulation. Not sure if we're going to dig another tunnel through this piece, or just put some more of that hand-made touch into the piece. So Chris gives a little heat, makes a little mark with the tweezers. That lets him know where to heat. Now he's kind of circling his mark, heating around that area. He'll have a real hot spot. Basically just kind of liquefying that area. Jeff takes a reheat. We can go back in and create some of these marks. Okay, here we go. Pressing into the glass. Whoa. Good deep mark with that graphite tool. It looks like some final moves there, some final touches from Céline herself, which is really nice. Nice to see her getting involved, getting much more comfortable in the hot shop here in Corning. This environment can be pretty intimidating. A lot of hot stuff, a lot of teamwork, a lot of communication. But Celine's new approach to this new material for her, It's been fantastic watching her throughout the week grow as an artist. It's been wonderful to be part of that growth here as well. So now, as far as the glass goes, we need to kind of balance those temperatures, make sure that the bottom section of the piece is nice and warm. Some corners down there too. Corners like to create stress or hold stress. So make sure those areas are nice and warm, happy, before we break this piece free from the punty. This piece will go into an annealer. It'll slowly cool down overnight. The slow cooling process for this piece probably take 12 hours, maybe 16, something like that. Let it slowly cool down, and that'll alleviate any stress or strain left in the molecular structure of the glass. Jeff has the gloves and the hoodie, face shield. So he'll put his arms into our annealing oven. It's 966 degrees Fahrenheit. A little bit of water on that punty connection. A good sharp tap to the pipe and the glass should break free. There it goes. We'll torch the bottom, just kind of smoothing out any little sharp spots, just so when we take this piece out of the kiln tomorrow, we don't have any little sharp spots for anybody to cut their fingers on, but that goes into the kiln. And there you have it. A beautiful piece by Céline Salomon. Chris Rochelle, Jeff Mack, and Katie Hubbs on the team. My name is Tom. Lots of fun here today. Wonderful week with Céline. We're having lots of fun. Feel free to ask any other questions online. We'll try to field them for you. Thank you so much for tuning in, joining us for this awesome guest artist programming here at the Corning Museum of Glass. For the folks that are here with us, there's lots to see and do here at the museum, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.